I want to start by telling you that I am not a paranoid person. I am not someone who wraps their laptop camera in tape or unplugs their router before bed. Or at least I wasn't. I used to think the people who talked about smart homes as surveillance traps were the same breed as flat earthers and moon landing skeptics. People who had too much time and too little trust in the basic goodness of the world around them. That was before. Now I sleep with the bedroom door locked and a door wedge kicked under it, even though I live alone. Now I check every single device in my home before I go to sleep, not to make sure they're working, but to make sure they're doing only what I told them to do. Now I know, in a way I wish I didn't, that the most dangerous invasions of your life don't always come through a smashed window or a kicked-in door. Sometimes they come through a Wi-Fi signal. Sometimes they come through a $29 light bulb. Sometimes they come through the very devices you installed to make yourself feel safer. These are 3 true stories, my own, my neighbor's. And one that belongs to a woman I'll call Dara, because she asked me not to use her real name. She's still dealing with the legal aftermath. She told me I could share what happened to her because she wants other people to know. She wants you to know, so here we go. I'm going to take you inside 3 homes that became something other than safe. And I'm going to beg you, by the end, to take just a few steps that might spare you from ending up in the same place. It started in October 2 years ago. I had just moved into a new apartment, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building in a mid-sized city I won't name, because even now I don't want to make it easy for him to find this. The apartment was clean, freshly painted, and wired up beautifully by its previous tenant, who apparently shared my enthusiasm for home automation. When I moved in, there was already a mesh Wi-Fi network humming through the walls, a set of smart bulbs in every room, a video doorbell mounted by the front door, and a smart lock on the deadbolt. My landlord, a man in his 60s who smelled like pipe tobacco and seemed vaguely embarrassed by all the technology, handed me a handwritten list of passwords and told me the previous tenant had gone a bit overboard with the gadgets. He said I was welcome to strip them all out if I wanted. I didn't want, I was thrilled. I spent my first weekend customizing everything. I set schedules for the lights, a warm, dim glow in the evenings, bright, cool light in the mornings to help me wake up. I linked the smart lock to my phone so I could check whether I'd locked the door from anywhere. I set up the video doorbell to send me a notification anytime something moved on my doorstep. I created a whole little ecosystem, and I was absurdly proud of it. I remember thinking, as I stood in my kitchen that first Sunday evening watching the lights shift to their programmed evening warmth right on schedule, that this was the future. This was living. The first sign that something was wrong came about 6 weeks after I moved in. It was a Tuesday night, around 11:30, and I was already in bed reading when the hallway light turned on. I hadn't scheduled it to do that. I lay there for a moment, staring at the thin strip of light visible under my bedroom door. I told myself I must have made a mistake in the scheduling app. I told myself I probably fat-fingered something when I'd adjusted the settings the week before. I got up, walked to the hallway, and the light clicked off, just like that. As if something had noticed me noticing it, I stood in the dark for a full minute. My heart was beating in a way I didn't totally understand. Then I laughed at myself, walked back to bed, and chalked it up to a glitch. The second sign came 3 nights later. I was cooking dinner a Thursday around 7, and I had the kitchen lights set to a specific brightness I liked for cooking. About 70% warm white, no blue tones. Halfway through chopping an onion, the lights dimmed, not off, just dimmer, down to maybe 40%. I waited to see if they'd correct themselves. They didn't. I opened the app, checked the schedule, and there was nothing that should have triggered a change at that time. I manually adjusted them back and kept cooking. But here is the thing I didn't let myself think about until later. The lights hadn't glitched randomly. They hadn't strobed or flickered or turned off entirely. They had dimmed precisely in a controlled way, as if someone had slid a dimmer switch with a deliberate, careful hand. Over the next 2 weeks, it kept happening. The lights in the living room would shift color temperature when I was watching TV, going from the warm white I'd set to a cooler, bluer tone. The morning lights would trigger 30 minutes early, jolting me awake before my alarm. One night, the bedroom light turned on at 2 in the morning, and I sat upright in a blind panic before I understood what had woken me. I called the manufacturer's support line. They walked me through a factory reset of the hub. I changed all my passwords. Everything went quiet for a few days, and I almost believed it was over. It wasn't over. About a month after the light incidents began, I noticed something with the door lock. I was at work a Wednesday afternoon when I got a notification on my phone, front door unlocked. I stared at the notification for a long time. I had not unlocked it. No one else had a code for my lock. I immediately tapped lock in the app and I watched the little icon shift from open to closed. Then 40 seconds later, front door unlocked. Again. I left work in the middle of the afternoon. I practically ran home. I stood outside my apartment door out of breath and checked the lock physically. It was locked. The deadbolt was thrown. I let myself in with my key, walked through every room, checked inside the closets, looked under the bed. Nothing. No one. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it. I called my landlord. He was sympathetic but useless. He called it a technology issue and suggested I call the company. When I pressed him about whether anyone else might have access, a maintenance worker, a previous tenant, anyone, he got cagey. He said the previous tenant had, of course, given back all the access codes before vacating. Of course. I called a locksmith that afternoon and had the smart lock replaced with a manual deadbolt. And then I did something I should have done weeks earlier. I hired someone to audit my entire home network. What he found made my hands go cold. The mesh Wi-Fi network that had come with the apartment, the one I had just adopted wholesale, the one I had trustingly added all of my devices to, had a second administrator account. Not mine. Someone else had admin access to the router, which meant they had visibility into every device connected to it, which meant they had been watching. How long had they been watching? The network logs told a partial story. Someone had been accessing the router's admin panel remotely, on and off, for as long as the logs went back, and the logs only went back 3 months. 3 months. I had been in that apartment for exactly 3 months. I thought about the light schedules. I thought about how whoever had access had learned my routine, could see when I was home, when I was asleep, when I was in which room. A dimmed light when I was cooking. An early morning trigger. A bedroom light at 2 a.m. I had not stopped to ask, during any of those moments, what someone might be learning from watching those patterns. They knew when I woke up. They knew when I went to bed. They knew, based on which lights were active, exactly which room I was in at any given moment of every evening. I moved out of that apartment 4 days later. I did not renew my lease. I did not go back for the last few things I'd left in the kitchen. I told the police, who took a report and told me that without knowing who had access to the router, there wasn't much they could do. I never found out who had that second admin account. I don't know if it was the previous tenant, a building maintenance worker, or someone else entirely. What I know is this: I had walked into someone else's network and called it home. I had added my life to a system I had never verified was mine alone. Never inherit a smart home setup without wiping everything and starting from scratch. Never. Not the router, not the hub, not a single bulb. Factory reset every device. Create every account yourself from zero. If you move into a place with an existing network, treat it like a stranger's car. You don't drive it until you've checked under the hood. Myra, that's what I'll call her, because she's my former neighbor and she deserves her privacy, is one of the most competent people I've ever met. She's a registered nurse who works 12-hour shifts and somehow manages to run a container garden on her apartment balcony and read 2 books a month. She is not careless. She is not naive. What happened to her happened not because she was foolish, but because she was trusting in a way that most of us are, and because someone exploited that trust with patience and precision. Myra bought a baby monitor when she was pregnant with her second child. Not just any baby monitor, one of the high-end Wi-Fi-enabled ones with a camera, 2-way audio, night vision, and an app that let you check the feed from anywhere. It had nearly 5 stars on the retailer's website. She set it up in the nursery 3 weeks before her due date, mostly because she wanted to test it out and make sure everything was working before the baby came home. The setup was easy. Too easy, she told me later. Download the app, create an account, scan a QR code on the camera, connect to Wi-Fi, done. She tested the feed from the kitchen while the camera sat in the empty nursery, and she could see everything. The white crib, the yellow curtains, the little stuffed elephant sitting in the corner. It was perfect. She felt prepared. She brought her daughter home on a Sunday in March. Life exploded in that beautiful, sleepless, overwhelming way that a new baby makes it explode, and she didn't think about the monitor much. It was just part of the landscape now. A glowing eye in the corner of the nursery that she checked from her phone while she was feeding the baby at 2 a.m., while she was eating lunch in the kitchen, while she was on the phone with her mother. It became invisible to her, the way all the things we live with eventually become invisible. The first thing she noticed, and this is where I want you to really pay attention, because this is the moment that everything turned, was a sound. Her daughter was 8 weeks old. Myra was in the living room, and she could hear through the monitor app that the baby was sleeping, that soft little sighing breath of a newborn in a deep sleep. And then she heard something else. A very faint sound just for a second, almost like static, almost like a breath. She told me she froze. She said it was one of those animal brain moments where your body understands something before your mind catches up. She walked to the nursery. The baby was asleep. The room was empty. She checked behind the door in the closet. Nothing. She told herself she'd imagined it, but she checked the two-way audio settings in the app. The feature was on. It was always on. She turned it off. She told herself that had probably been the source of some stray audio pickup. She went back to the living room. 2 weeks later, she was watching the monitor feed on her phone while she sat in the kitchen, and she noticed that the camera had moved. She was sure of it. She had placed the camera on the dresser in a specific orientation, angled slightly toward the door, so she could see both the crib and the room entrance. Now it was angled straight at the crib. Just at the crib, the door was entirely out of frame. Some models of Wi-Fi cameras are pan-tilt capable, meaning someone with access to the camera's feed can remotely control where it's pointing. This was one of those models. She hadn't known that. It wasn't something she'd consciously set up or considered. She told her husband. He said she probably bumped it. She knew she hadn't bumped it, but she repositioned it and let it go. The third thing was what broke her. She was home alone with the baby on an afternoon when her husband was at work. She was in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, nursing her daughter. The monitor was on the dresser, its little green light blinking steadily, and then it blinked off, then back on, then off. Like someone was cycling through settings. Like someone was doing something with the camera in real time while she was in the room with her child. She stood up, walked to the camera, and physically unplugged it from the wall. Her hands were shaking. She sat back down in the rocking chair and she cried. And she wasn't entirely sure why she was crying, except that something felt profoundly, violently wrong. She called her husband and he came home from work early. He sat down with her laptop and started going through the camera's account settings. What they found was this: the camera was associated with 2 accounts. Myra's, which she had set up, and one other, an email address she had never seen, had never created, didn't recognize in any way. They called the manufacturer's support line. They spent 2 hours on hold. When they finally got through, the support representative could not explain how a second account had come to be linked to the device. The representative offered to escalate the issue. He offered to send them a replacement camera. He did not offer any information about who owned the other account, citing privacy policy as his reason. The account that had been watching Myra's baby in Myra's baby's room was protected by a privacy policy. The camera went in a drawer, then it went in the trash. Later, much later, after they'd consulted a tech-savvy friend and done their own research, they found that the model of camera they'd purchased had a known security vulnerability that had been publicly disclosed. Several months before Myra had bought it, the manufacturer had been aware of the vulnerability. A patch had been issued, but only if you manually updated the firmware, which most users, understandably, had no idea they needed to do. The vulnerability allowed someone who knew the device ID to link a second account to the camera, without the original owner's knowledge or consent. The device ID was printed on a sticker on the back of the camera, visible to anyone who handled the box. Maybe a warehouse worker, maybe someone in a delivery chain. Maybe someone who'd handled a return. Myra reported it to local police who logged it. She reported it to the FTC. She contacted the manufacturer in writing and received a form letter in response. As far as she knows, the person who watched her baby was never identified and never faced any consequences. She told me, "The worst part is not knowing how long it was happening before I noticed. Because I only noticed 3 things, but the camera had been in that room for months. When you buy any camera, you update the firmware before you ever connect it to your network. You check whether the device has any known security vulnerabilities. You change the default password to something strong and unique. You disable any remote access features you are not deliberately using. And you check the linked accounts regularly to make sure that only your account is associated with the device. Do it now tonight if you have a camera in your home. Check it right now. Dara asked me not to use her name, and so I won't. But she wanted this story told, and I'm going to do my best to tell it the way she told it to me, carefully, completely, and without softening the parts that are hard to hear. Dara had been with her boyfriend for 2.5 years when she moved into his house. He had suggested she move in. He had framed it as a step forward, a commitment, a beginning. He was, by all the metrics she'd been taught to rely on, a good partner. Steady job, remembered her preferences, met her friends and charmed them, never raised his voice. He also had a very smart home, smart locks, smart thermostat, smart lights, smart speakers in the kitchen, the living room, the bedroom, and the home office. A whole home security system with cameras at every entrance and motion sensors in the main rooms. He had set all of it up himself, over years of careful accumulation. He was, in his words, really into this stuff. In the beginning, Dara found it impressive. The house anticipated things. The temperature adjusted to their preferences. The lights shifted throughout the day. His voice could change anything, the music, the TV, the thermostat, the brightness. She felt, she told me, like she'd moved into the future. She did not have access to any of it. She realized this gradually. She'd ask the smart speaker to change the music and it would tell her she didn't have permission. She'd try to adjust the thermostat app and find she wasn't an authorized user. She mentioned to him lightly that it might be nice to have access. He laughed and said he'd set her up soon, and the topic passed. And then it passed again, and again. She started to notice things around month 4 of living there. He would reference conversations she'd had in rooms where he hadn't been. Not dramatically, not in ways that were easy to name as wrong, just small things. She'd be on the phone with her sister in the kitchen, and later that evening, he'd make an offhand comment that connected, eerily, to something she'd said. She'd be talking to herself while she was getting dressed, a habit she'd always had, narrating her thoughts to no one, and he'd bring up something she'd said in passing as if he'd been there. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that she was probably talking louder than she thought, or that he was home more than she'd registered. She told herself that she was in a new living situation and still adjusting, still calibrating what was normal. The thermostat was what finally cracked it open. He was away for a work trip 4 days, the first extended time apart since she'd moved in. Dara was alone in the house, and for the first day she simply enjoyed the unusual quiet. On the second day she got cold. She went to the thermostat on the wall to adjust it and found she couldn't, the interface was locked, requiring a PIN she didn't have. She pulled up the app on her phone and found again she wasn't an authorized user. She sent him a text asking for the PIN. He called instead of texting, and he walked her through making the adjustment remotely from his phone from wherever he was. She asked, while he was on the phone, why she'd never been given access. He said he didn't want her to mess with the settings he'd carefully calibrated. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she thought it might be good for her to have access to her own home's thermostat. He said, in a voice she described to me as very patient, very calm, "Our home, and you have access." Through me, she hung up and stood in the hallway for a long time. That night she started paying different attention. She walked through every room and looked at the devices with new eyes. She counted the cameras. There were 6 exterior-facing ones, which seemed like a lot. There were motion sensors in the living room, kitchen, and hallway. The bedroom had a smart speaker on the nightstand. The bathroom did not, but the hallway just outside the bathroom door did have a motion sensor. She did something that I think took tremendous courage. She downloaded a network scanning app on her phone and connected to the home Wi-Fi. Even without admin access, she could see a list of every device on the network. She didn't know what everything was, but she took screenshots of all of it. Then she called her brother, who works in it. Her brother drove to the house that night. He spent 3 hours going through everything he could access without admin credentials. What he found and what he explained to her was this. The smart speakers, all 4 of them, were set to always on listening mode, meaning they were not just activated by a wake word. They were continuously recording audio, and per the device settings her brother found documented in the manufacturer's literature, storing clips that met certain audio thresholds. Her boyfriend, as the account administrator, had access to those recordings. Every conversation Dara had had in that house for 4 months had potentially been recorded, stored, accessible. Her brother also found, in the router's admin interface, which he accessed using a default password that had apparently never been changed, a remote access profile that had been recently and frequently accessed from a device that was not in the house. He couldn't tell her exactly what was being accessed, but someone was logging into the home network remotely, regularly. She left that night. She packed 2 bags while her brother stood in the hallway, and she was out of the house in 40 minutes. She went to her sister's. She called a lawyer the next morning. The legal situation was complicated, she told me, because so much of what had happened existed in a gray zone. Was it illegal to have always-on recording devices in a home you both occupied? The answer depended on state wiretapping laws, on consent provisions, on a dozen variables her lawyer had to untangle. The camera coverage of entrances was legal. The motion sensors were legal. The recording capability of the smart speakers occupied uncertain legal territory that her lawyer described as actively being litigated across the country. He had not installed hidden cameras. He had not done anything that was unambiguously, clearly, prosecutably illegal. He had built an ecosystem of control using entirely legal, commercially available products, and had used them to surveil the woman he lived with. To know her movements and her conversations and her routines, to ensure that in the home they nominally shared, all the information flowed in one direction. To him, Dara's lawyer did eventually find a path forward, a civil action, combined with a police report about the network access logs that ultimately resulted in a restraining order. The broader legal question of the recordings remains unresolved. She told me, the scariest thing wasn't that he was watching me. It was that I had lived there for 4 months before I understood that I was being watched. And if he hadn't gone on that trip, if I hadn't gotten cold, if I hadn't needed to change the thermostat, I might still be there. Here is what I want you to take from Dara's story. Beyond the obvious horror of it, control over smart home devices is control over information. Control over information is power. If you share a home with someone and you do not have equal, independent access to every system in that home, you need to ask why. Not because everyone who sets up a smart home is doing what Dara's boyfriend did, but because the technology makes it possible in a way it never was before, and it makes it possible quietly, invisibly, with devices that look like convenience and comfort. If someone won't give you access to the thermostat in your own home, listen to that. I want to start by telling you that I am not a paranoid person. I have always been the skeptic in every conversation, the one rolling my eyes at conspiracy theories, the one who buys the extended warranty and thinks that's sufficient due diligence. My name is Rachel, I'm 34 years old, I work in pharmaceutical sales, and until 14 months ago, I had a smart home setup that I was genuinely proud of. My husband Derek and I had spent almost $3,000 building it out over 2 years. Smart thermostat, smart locks, smart lights in every room, a video doorbell, a security camera on the back porch. I managed everything from my phone, and I genuinely loved, being able to check on the house from a hotel room in Cincinnati, to turn on the porch light before Derek got home, to know what temperature it was inside our house from anywhere on Earth. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday in February. I remember because it was brutally cold, the kind of cold that makes Columbus feel like the inside of a freezer, and when I woke up at 6:15 in the morning. The house was 68 degrees instead of the 62 we keep it at overnight. I assumed I'd accidentally changed the schedule. Derek assumed the same. We reset it and moved on. A week later it happened again, 68 degrees at 5 a.m., then 69. Then one morning I walked into the kitchen and it was 71 degrees and I hadn't touched the thermostat app in days. I checked the history log on the app. The thermostat keeps a record of every temperature change, every adjustment, every time someone manually overrides the schedule. And there they were, a series of changes all made between midnight and 4 in the morning, all increasing the temperature by 1 or 2 degrees. Small, incremental, easy to miss. The timestamp on those changes showed they were being made from a device I didn't recognize. Not my phone, not Derek's. An unknown device, connecting to our home network through the Smart Thermostat's companion app. I want you to understand what that means, because it took me almost a full day to process it completely. Someone had access to our thermostat app. Someone had at some point logged into the account that controlled our thermostat. And then this is the part that makes my skin crawl even now. Instead of doing something dramatic and obvious, they had spent weeks just quietly raising the temperature, 1 degree at a time. Like they were testing something, like they wanted to know if we would notice. We called our internet service provider, they ran diagnostics. There was no breach of the network itself. What had happened was simpler and more frightening. Someone had figured out my password. It wasn't a particularly clever password. It was a variation of one I'd used since college, something I'd recycled across multiple accounts without thinking too much about it. At some point, that password had ended up in a data breach from a retail website. Whoever had it had simply tried it on the smart home app and gotten in. They had been in our account for 11 weeks. We never found out who it was. The IP addresses traced back through a series of VPNs and proxy servers. The police were sympathetic but honest about their limitations. We changed every password in our lives, enabled two-factor authentication on every account, and I went through a 2-month period where I couldn't sleep properly, knowing that for nearly 3 months. Someone had been in our digital home, playing with the thermostat, waiting for what, I still don't know, and somehow that's the worst part. Rachel's warning: use a unique complex password for every smart home account. Enable two-factor authentication. Check your device history regularly for unrecognized logins. The temperature log saved her from discovering something far worse. My daughter Emma was 4 years old when she started telling me about the man who talked to her at night. I'm going to pause here because I know how that sentence sounds, and I need you to know that I know how it sounds. I'm a 31-year-old mother and I teach 3rd grade, and I am very much grounded in reality. When Emma first mentioned the man, I assumed she was talking about a dream. Then I assumed it was an imaginary friend. Then I assumed it was Derek, her father, coming in at night to check on her, maybe half asleep himself. But Derek worked nights. He wasn't in the house between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. 3 nights a week. Emma's room had a baby monitor in it, not a basic audio-only monitor, but one of the new ones with a camera and two-way audio. It connected to our home Wi-Fi and let me watch the video feed from my phone. It had a built-in nightlight function and a white noise setting. And I had bought it specifically because it had a talkback feature, so I could soothe Emma if she woke up without having to get out of bed. The talkback feature worked through the app. You could see the room, press a button, and speak. Your voice would come out of the monitor's speaker in the baby's room. Someone else had access to the app. I discovered this the way I discovered most of the truth about that situation, slowly, and only because my daughter was braver than I gave her credit for. She told me the man asked her questions. He asked her what her name was. He asked her what her daddy looked like. He asked her what time her daddy came home. I am sitting here typing this and my hands are shaking because even now, 4 years later, the idea of it fills me with a rage and a terror that doesn't have a clean edge. Someone had hacked into my daughter's baby monitor. They had been watching her sleep. They had been talking to her in the dark. The monitor brand, I won't name it, but it was one of the big ones, one you've probably seen advertised, had a known security vulnerability that the company had been aware of for months. A researcher had published a paper about it. The company had issued a statement saying a patch was coming. The patch had not yet arrived. The police took this one seriously. They made arrests. I will tell you that there was more than one person involved, and that the monitor in Emma's room was not the only one they had accessed. I will not tell you more than that because I have a daughter who is now 8 years old, and has only just stopped asking me if the man in the monitor can hear her at school. This mother's warning: if you use a smart baby monitor, research its security history before purchase. Change the default username and password immediately. Register the device with the manufacturer so you receive security update notifications. If you can use a local network-only device that does not connect to the internet, do that. I've been with my girlfriend Maya for 3 years. Before Maya, I was with someone I'll call Daniel for 4 years. Daniel and I had a difficult breakup, threatening messages difficult. Restraining order difficult. I moved across the city. I changed my phone number. I did everything right. When Maya and I moved in together into our apartment in Capitol Hill, I insisted on a smart lock for the front door. Maya thought it was a little excessive. The building already had a buzzer system, but I wanted the control. I wanted to be able to see every time the door was unlocked and by whom. I wanted a log. After what I'd been through with Daniel, control over my own front door felt like something I needed. I set up the lock myself, created an account, added my phone and Maya's phone as authorized devices. The lock would unlock automatically when one of our phones was within Bluetooth range, and we could also unlock it remotely through the app if needed. I felt safe. For 7 months, I felt completely safe. Then one night in March, I got a push notification from the lock app. It was 11:42 p.m. Maya and I were both inside, already in bed. The notification said, "Front door unlocked, manual override." I grabbed Maya's arm so hard she cried out. We both stared at the notification. I opened the app and looked at the access log, and there it was, an entry I had not made from a device that was not mine or Maya's. We didn't move. I think we both understood in that moment, in the animal part of the brain that predates language, that we needed to stay very, very quiet. Nothing happened. The door did not open further. There were no footsteps. After 20 minutes, I called 911. The officers who responded checked the hallway, checked the building entrance, checked the parking structure. No one was there. But when I checked the app's full history the next morning, I found something that made everything worse. The device that had attempted the manual override. I say attempted because Maya had thrown the door's physical deadbolt at some point that evening out of habit. And the manual override had failed to fully open the door because of it. That device had accessed the lock app 67 times over the preceding 3 months. Not always attempting to unlock, sometimes just checking if we were home, checking the lock's status. The account had been created during the setup process when I first installed the lock. I'd done a factory reset on the device itself. But I hadn't checked whether the previous owner, this apartment was a sublet, had created an account tied to the lock's serial number through a different email address. The lock allowed multiple accounts to be registered to a single device. We don't know who it was, could have been the previous tenant, could have been the landlord. Could have been Daniel, who I will never be able to prove found me. I moved again. Maya and I moved. I don't own any smart locks. Her warning: when you install a smart lock in a new-to-you space, perform a full factory reset and check with the manufacturer to ensure all previous account associations have been cleared. A factory reset alone may not remove all linked accounts on the server side. Here's what I thought I was getting when I bought a 4-camera indoor security system: peace of mind. My wife and I both travel for work. We have a house in East Nashville that we've put a lot of money into, and we thought cameras would make us feel better about leaving it empty. We set them up, connected them to the cloud storage service the manufacturer offered, and genuinely forgot about them for most of the year. We'd check the footage occasionally if a neighbor texted about something strange, or when our dog sitter was over. What we did not think about, what I genuinely never once considered, was who else might be watching that footage. My name is Marcus, I'm 42. I found out about the breach the way a lot of people find out about these things, from a stranger on the internet who had a conscience. Someone posted a message to a Reddit thread about smart home security. They said they had purchased access to what they described as a, quote, multi-camera residential feed on a darknet forum. They said the footage included interior shots of a kitchen, a living room, a hallway, and a home office. They said they were posting a warning because the footage included what appeared to be a minor in several clips, and they wanted to alert the homeowners. They included at the end of their post the serial number from the camera visible in one of the shots. My serial number. I want to tell you what it feels like to learn that footage of your private life. Your arguments about money at the kitchen table. Your wife crying on the couch after her mother's diagnosis. Your stepson doing his homework in the room we all thought was private, has been sold on a darknet forum. There isn't a word for it. Violation is too small, desecration is closer. The cameras had been running on outdated firmware. The company had released a critical security update 6 months earlier, but the auto-update function had failed silently. It had tried to update, encountered an error, logged the error internally. And then not updated. And not notified us. The vulnerability allowed remote access to the live feed without authentication if you knew where to look. The person who posted the warning on Reddit cooperated with investigators. The forum that sold the access was eventually shut down. We never fully determined how many people had purchased access to our feed, or for how long, or what they had seen. I'm telling you this not for sympathy, but because I need you to understand that the cloud footage from your cameras is not sitting in a private vault somewhere. It's data. It lives on servers. It moves through networks, and it can be stolen. Marcus's warning: enable automatic firmware updates on all smart cameras, then verify every few months that the update actually ran. Check your camera manufacturer's security bulletin page for known vulnerabilities. Consider whether you need 24/7 cloud recording at all, or whether local storage on a home server serves your needs better. I know how the title sounds. Let me explain. I live alone in a house I bought after my divorce. Small house, nice neighborhood, close to work. I got a smart speaker because my therapist actually suggested it. She thought having something to talk to in the evenings might help with the isolation I'd been experiencing post-divorce. Look, I know, but it helped genuinely to be able to say things out loud to something that responded, even if the response was just the weather forecast or a playlist. I had the speaker in my living room for about 8 months before the evening it asked me a question I hadn't asked it. It was a Tuesday, around 9 p.m. I was reading. The speaker was in standby, the light ring was dark, no music playing, just sitting there the way it always did. And then it said in the calm, unhurried voice of the assistant, "Is anyone home with you tonight?" I put down my book. I stared at the speaker for a long time. I tried to think of every rational explanation. Had I said something that triggered the wake word? Had a TV show played a phrase that sounded like the activation command? I replayed the silence before the question. I hadn't said anything. There was no TV on. I asked the speaker to replay its recent activity log. It said it had no recent activity recorded. I asked it what it had just said. It said it didn't understand the question. I asked out loud to the empty living room, to no one and nothing in particular, "Is someone listening right now?" The speaker said, "I'm here if you need me." I unplugged it. I sat in the dark for a while, and then, because I am a methodical person, I started to investigate. What I found was a configuration issue with the speaker's drop-in feature, which allows pre-approved contacts to open a two-way audio connection to the device without the owner explicitly answering. Someone in my contacts, I eventually traced it back to my ex-husband's account, which I had added to the device during our marriage and never removed, had the drop-in feature enabled. He could open an audio connection to my living room. He could hear everything I said. Whether or not he had used it regularly is something I will never be able to prove. My divorce attorney thought it would make a compelling case. My ex-husband denied ever activating the feature. The device logs were not detailed enough to show individual drop-in sessions. I have not owned a smart speaker since. This woman's warning: if you use a smart speaker with a drop-in or communication feature, audit your approved contacts immediately, especially following a breakup, divorce, or any change in household members. Remove anyone who should no longer have access. Change the account password. Disable the drop-in feature entirely if you live alone. I want to talk about smart home routines for a minute, because I think people underestimate how much information they encode. A routine, in smart home parlance, is an automated sequence. Turn on the coffee maker at 6:45 a.m. Dim the living room lights at 9 p.m. and switch the TV to the streaming app. Lock the front door and arm the alarm at 10:30 p.m. Turn everything off at 11. These are convenience features, but taken together they're also a precise map of your daily behavior. My name is Kevin, I'm 38. I'm a commercial real estate broker in Chicago, and I have been doing the smart home thing since before it was mainstream. I built a pretty elaborate system: motion sensors, automated blinds, smart plugs on every major appliance, a comprehensive routine that ran my house like clockwork. The trouble started when I noticed that my electricity bills were higher than expected during a 2-week period, when I was out of the country for work. My smart home was running on vacation mode, reduced lighting, no coffee maker, everything scaled back, but the bills suggested otherwise. Something in the house was drawing power at the normal daily usage levels at the normal daily times. My routines were running, all of them, while I was in Munich. Someone had logged into my smart home hub remotely and disabled the vacation mode setting. Then they had let the routines run normally, which meant that to any external observer, a neighbor, someone watching the house, anyone monitoring which windows lit up and when my house appeared occupied, the lights came on at 6:45. The TV light flickered in the living room window at 9 p.m. The porch light went off at 11. Here's what I couldn't figure out at first: why? If someone had access to my smart home account, why would they use it to make my house look like I was home, when in fact making it look empty would have been the more useful information for a burglar? The answer came from the police detective who handled the case. He had seen this before, twice actually in the same year. The smart home account hadn't been hacked for the purpose of burglarizing my house. It had been accessed by someone who was using the routine data to track my patterns, watching the logs, learning my schedule, knowing exactly what time I woke up, when I left for work, when I came home, when I went to bed. They had re-enabled the routines remotely specifically to cover their tracks, to make the electricity usage look normal so I wouldn't notice the unauthorized access. Someone had been studying me for at least 2 months before I caught it. I don't know what they intended to do with that information. I moved my home office to a different room and installed a completely separate, air-gapped alarm system. Kevin's warning: periodically check your smart home hub's activity logs for remote access entries, especially during times when you know you weren't using the app. Enable notifications for login activity. Treat your smart home account with the same security vigilance as your banking app. I need you to think for a moment about what a robot vacuum actually does as it moves around your home. It maps. Every single one of the current generation robotic vacuums builds a detailed floor plan of your living space. It knows where your furniture is. It knows the layout of every room. It knows which doors are open and which are closed, and it knows this at the time and day it's running. Some of them have cameras that assist with obstacle avoidance. Some of those cameras save images. All of that data, the maps, the schedules, the images, goes somewhere. I'm an engineer, I'm 29. I should have thought about this before I bought one. I didn't think about it until after. I discovered the issue through a published research paper. A team of academics had done a security analysis of several major robot vacuum brands and found that one of the models, the exact model I owned, transmitted its mapping data to company servers without adequate encryption, and that under certain conditions. Those maps were accessible through the company's API with minimal authentication. I contacted the company. They were responsive, actually, and to their credit, they patched the vulnerability within a month. But in the period before the patch, my floor plan, the precise layout of every room in my apartment, with furniture placement, obstacle notes, and cleaning schedule timestamps, had been sitting in an insufficiently secured database. The researcher who discovered the vulnerability told me something I've thought about every day since. He said that a detailed floor plan of a home, combined with a cleaning schedule, tells a sophisticated actor exactly where valuables might be stored, which rooms are regularly in use, and when the home is typically active. Combined with the publicly available information most people don't think twice about sharing, the neighborhood, the approximate address, the general wealth indicators of a social media profile, it becomes something close to a blueprint for a targeted intrusion. My apartment was never broken into. I don't know if anyone ever accessed my specific data. But the potential was there, and the potential is still there for millions of households running the same devices. I don't own a robot vacuum anymore. I push a broom, it's less convenient. It has never been hacked. This engineer's warning: research the data practices of any smart home device before purchase, including how mapping data is stored and transmitted. Check whether your device's company has been involved in any data breach disclosures. Look up the device's name plus security vulnerability in a web search before you bring it into your home. What I'm about to describe happened over the course of about 40 minutes, and I want to try to convey the specific texture of fear that comes from something happening slowly, methodically, one small piece at a time. My name is Sandra. I'm 55 years old. I'm a retired school principal. I live alone in the house my husband and I bought together in 1998. He passed away 4 years ago. My children are both out of state. I got the smart home set up because my son insisted it would make me safer. Better cameras, better locks, a medical alert integration in case I fell. He set it all up during a Thanksgiving visit, and it worked beautifully. I felt, if anything, more connected to him because we could both access the same security feed. On a December evening, I was watching television when the lights in my kitchen turned off. I assumed a bulb had blown. I went to check, and as I walked into the kitchen, the hallway lights turned off behind me. I turned around, darkness. I told myself the power was fluctuating, that does happen sometimes in winter, and I walked to the electrical panel. Everything looked fine, no tripped breakers. I walked back into the hallway and the living room lights went off. I stood very still. I'm going to be honest with you. I am not a woman who panics easily, but standing in near darkness in a quiet house, watching the lights turn off one by one in rooms I wasn't in, I felt something I can only describe as primal. Something was making choices, and I was not the one making them. The porch light went off next, then the exterior security lights. My house was now dark from the outside. Anyone driving or walking past would have seen nothing, no indication of occupancy. Then the lock on my front door made a sound, a small sound, the mechanical sound of a bolt retracting. I called 911. I was connected to a dispatcher within seconds. I described what was happening and I want to say, extremely clear and calm. The dispatcher kept me on the line and officers were outside within 4 minutes. They found no one on the property. But when they checked the door, the one whose bolt I had heard retract, it was unlocked. My son and I spent the next 2 weeks going through every device, every account, every linked app. We found that the smart home hubs manufacturer had suffered a data breach 7 months earlier. The breach had included usernames, emails, and encrypted passwords. The encryption was not strong enough. My password, which my son had created for me during setup and which I had never changed, had been in a dictionary-type attack's reach. Whoever had gotten into the system had, as best we could reconstruct, been in the account for weeks. They had spent several sessions going through the device list, understanding what each device did. And then on that December evening, they had run a script that cycled through the lights and unlocked the front door in sequence. They either got scared off by the neighbors calling the police, or never intended to enter at all. The detective on the case suggested the latter, that it might have been a test, a proof of concept, someone seeing what they could make a house do. My son moved my security hub to a local-only network with no external cloud access. I now have a separate, non-smart deadbolt on my front door that does not connect to anything, and that can only be opened with a physical key. Sandra's warning: every smart home account should have two-factor authentication enabled, and the underlying email address for those accounts should also have two-factor authentication. If a manufacturer discloses a data breach, treat all passwords associated with that account as compromised and change them immediately, even if you don't receive a direct notification. This is the last story. I've saved it for last because it doesn't have a clean ending, and because clean endings aren't really the point. The point is to understand. My partner James and I were first-time parents. Our son Leo was 7 months old in the August this happened. We were exhausted in the way that parents of 7-month-olds are exhausted, fundamentally, comprehensively exhausted. In the bones and behind the eyes, and the smart home devices that people had given us as gifts when Leo was born felt like lifelines. The monitor with video, the smart bassinet that rocked itself, the app that showed us Leo's room temperature and logged his sleep patterns, the white noise machine connected to the hub. We had more devices in Leo's room than in any other room in the house, because that was where our anxiety lived. The evening it happened, James and I were eating dinner. Leo had gone down easily at 7:30, and we were watching him on the monitor app on my phone, the way new parents do, checking it every few minutes even when the house is silent. At about 8:45 p.m. we heard through the monitor speaker a sound, Leo laughing, not fussing, not crying, not the small sounds of a baby sleeping. Full, bright, delighted baby laughter, the kind of laugh that Leo made when you blew a raspberry on his stomach or made a surprised face at him. The laugh of a baby being played with. James and I looked at each other, we looked at the monitor feed. Leo was in his bassinet on his back kicking his feet. He was alone, we ran to his room, he was perfectly fine. Happy even, he looked up at us and smiled the way babies smile when they're in a good mood for no particular reason. Nothing in the room was out of place. The window was locked. The closet was empty. The room held only Leo and his things and the soft blue light of the white noise machine and the small camera eye of the monitor watching us from the dresser. We sat on the floor of his room for a long time, one of us on each side of the bassinet, not saying anything. Leo fell back asleep. The white noise machine hummed. It took us 3 days to find an answer, and even the answer wasn't complete. What we determined was this: the monitor had captured audio from somewhere outside our house, a family walking by on the street, a baby in a stroller, a child laughing on the sidewalk, and played it back through the room speaker due to an audio processing error in the firmware. The firmware had a known bug that caused it to occasionally replay fragments of previously captured audio, or in some cases, audio from nearby devices on the same network. The manufacturer confirmed the bug. They released a patch. In the grand scope of smart home security horrors, this one was relatively benign. But here is what I can't stop thinking about, what I find myself returning to at 3 in the morning when Leo is asleep down the hall and the house is quiet, for 3 minutes on a Tuesday evening. I heard my son laugh in an empty room. And my first thought, the instinctive, gut-level mammalian thought before the rational explanations arrived, was not software glitch. My first thought was, something is in there with him. That thought taught me something about what we have built in our homes. We have created objects that can produce the uncanny, that can mirror life in ways our nervous systems aren't equipped to evaluate quickly. We have made our homes speak and respond and watch, and we have not spent nearly enough time thinking about what it means when they speak and respond and watch in ways we didn't intend. We kept the monitor, we kept most of the smart devices. Leo is 2 now, and he runs through a house full of smart lights that he finds tremendously entertaining to turn on and off with his voice. We changed the passwords, we enabled the two-factor authentication, we read the security disclosures when the emails came, we do what we can. But some nights when the house is quiet and the devices are doing their silent, tireless work monitoring and measuring and recording and storing, I think about all the things they notice that I don't. All the data they generate that I've never read. All the small, incremental changes that might be happening in the logs right now, 1 degree at a time. And I go around the house like my grandmother used to do, and I check the locks. The real ones, the ones that don't have apps. Every story in this collection shares a common thread that has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with attention. Not one of these situations was inevitable. Every single one could have been stopped or caught sooner or never started if someone had been watching the right thing at the right time. That's not blame, that's information. We adopt new technology at the speed of convenience, and we assess its risks at the speed of catastrophe. That's human nature. But the gap between those two speeds is exactly where the people in these stories got hurt. Here is what the 12 people in this collection would have you know, distilled into the simplest possible advice. Change your passwords. Not the passwords you think are fine, but all of them. Use a password manager. Enable two-factor authentication on every account linked to a device in your home. Audit those accounts regularly, once a month if you can manage it. When you move into a new home, factory reset every device you inherit and assume that someone else has access until you have verified otherwise. When a manufacturer announces a security update, apply it that day. When a manufacturer announces a breach, treat every password associated with their ecosystem as compromised. And sometimes, not always, not in fear, but sometimes, sit in your smart home and ask yourself, if someone else could see what this device sees right now, what would they see? If the answer makes you uncomfortable, it should. That discomfort is data. These stories happen to real people in real houses with real families. They happened in Columbus and Austin and Seattle and Nashville and Phoenix and Chicago and San Francisco and Atlanta and Minneapolis. They happened in houses that looked exactly like yours. They are not cautionary tales from some distant imagined future. They are dispatches from the present tense. Be careful, be informed. Be the person in your household who reads the security disclosure emails. Stay safe out there.